Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Driving More Value with Automated Analytics. We'll be starting in just about a minute as we wait for last-minute attendees to sign in, so please stand by. Well, it looks like we've got the majority of our attendees signed in, so we will go ahead and start the webinar now. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Driving More Value with Automated Analytics, brought to you by AuditNet. My name is Jim Kaplan, the person behind AuditNet. For those of you who don't know me, I'm a former chief audit executive, Internet for Auditors pioneer, and an auditor who believes and promotes the use of audit technology. Today, I'm pleased to welcome Arbutus for driving more value with automated analytics. Arbutus delivers the very best in data analytics and automation technology to meet the requirements of today's auditors, business analysts, and fraud investigators. Thousands of users in over 60 countries rely on Arbutus to enhance testing, analysis, and compliance capabilities. Integrate easily with the complementary tools you use today and connect to virtually any data source. Cost-effective, scalable, and user-friendly technology for technical and non-technical users. Find out why federal, state, and local governments choose Arbutus Analytics technology by visiting their site at www.arbutusanalytics.com. Before we proceed to today's presentation, I'd like to remind everyone of the housekeeping information. The housekeeping files were sent this morning and are also available as a handout download. In the interest of time, I will cover the highlights, but you are expected to review and adhere to the information for all AuditNet webinars. Important items to note, we are recording today's webinar. If you meet the CPE criteria by answering all the polling questions, you will receive a CPE confirmation email within 5 business days with the link to download your certificate. Reminder that you must answer all of the polling questions in order to receive CPE. There will be no partial CPE provided. CPE emails will be sent from noreply@gensend.io about 5 days after the event. You must be able to receive emails from that email address, so please have your IT department whitelist noreply@gensend.io. If you have firewalls that are preventing these from getting through, then you need to notify your IT department that these emails will be coming. You can ask questions using the chat box on your control panel. I'll be moderating those questions and I will pass them along to our presenters for today, usually at the time of the break for the polling questions. So with that, I will now turn the floor over to Brad Thiessen for introducing today's webinar. Brad?
All right, thank you, Jim, and hello, everyone. Thanks for joining today's webinar, Driving More Value with Automated Analytics. Certainly the automation of analytics is not a new topic and was recognized for its potential value. But there continues to be a lot of unfulfilled potential in this area among many audit teams. And whether you would frame that in terms of continuous auditing, continuous monitoring, continuous risk assessment, or even in more basic terms, the ability to run certain key analytics regularly. We certainly hope that everyone here today can take away some helpful insights on this topic. Certainly here at Arbutus, we've certainly seen the full spectrum of use of automation in analytics, from very successful to full avoidance. You know, certainly as an organization, and specifically in my role as product management here at Arbutus, we are continually trying to listen to the challenges and priorities of the audit community, certainly as it relates to automation of analytics, and looking for ways to make the development and use of automated analytics easier, more effective, and sustainable. So I wanted to introduce my co-presenter today, Keith Barber. As you can see from the length of Keith's bio, his experience and skills in automated analytics is extensive, and it'll be great to have his insight today on our topic. So over to you, Keith.
Yeah, thanks, Brad. So in my experience, I'm coming at with 4 different viewpoints, essentially. I spent time in public accounting with the Big Four. I spent time as an internal auditor. I've spent time as a consultant creating automated solutions, and I've also spent time as a trainer, actually getting people engaged, teaching them the techniques so they can be successful. It's been such a passion that over time, we decided at Verity that because we encourage people to use technology, there are challenges and barriers that go along with that, which we can show a little bit later, but we really feel this is a great opportunity to develop very practical training that you can incorporate into your work very quickly. So I'm looking forward to sharing some of these insights with everybody today.
All right, we're going to get to our first polling question.
Our first polling. Go ahead, Brad.
Go ahead, Jim.
I was just going to say the polling question is up there. Reminder, you must answer all 4 polling questions in order to receive CPE for today. So we've got 87% have voted. We will leave the poll open for about another 30 or 40 seconds. Reminder, if you have any questions, please post those questions and we will try to get to those during the breaks for the poll. We have 91% have voted, 92%. Okay, the poll will close in 10 seconds. If you're looking for CPE, you must answer the polling questions. Okay, we will go ahead and we will close the poll now.
All right.
Share the results. Can you see those, Brad?
Yes, I can. All right. Yeah, looks good. Yeah, thanks for your input on this, everybody. I see we have every category is represented here, and it's obviously the leading category is little or no use of automated analytics. So, and we're hoping, as I said earlier, everyone here today can have something they can take away and potentially get a bit more confidence in moving forward if you see value in this initiative. As I said earlier, it's a topic of interest, and sort of glad to see everybody weigh in on this. Okay, let's move on to the agenda. Is that on the screen now? Just want to make sure everybody can see my screen. There we go. There we go. So just a quick look at what we're going to cover today. Certainly start with an overview in this topic. And as part of that overview, we still want to get into some definitions of some of the more current terms around in the analytics world, and want to give some context to those and give a little bit of definition of those for those that may not be familiar with them. And then sort of there's 3 main components we want to cover off today for the bulk of our content. First of all, the automation of analytics, sort of using those to gain insights, get the findings. Secondly, you want to manage the exceptions. How do you remediate the findings? And then finally, we want to get into a section around root cause analysis and how that might be connected to the prior 2 sessions. Certainly, each of these sections can stand on their own for ideas for everyone. But in the context sort of think about our webinar topic, driving more value with automated analytics, we think seeing these three areas collectively, working together is certainly an idea we want everyone hopefully to consider and see value in as we go through this. So let's get in to what we want to cover off here. Just want to confirm, Jim, is everybody seeing my screen okay?
Yes, we can
see a dashboard. Okay, you see the diagram? Okay, sorry, it must my feed on my side is a bit different. So this diagram represents, we would see all things around automated analytics. So on the left part of the screen, you'll see the whole category there around business intelligence. And business intelligence certainly is a term that's been around for a long time and represents certainly for most of us sort of the analytics tools we are using today, to gain process insight, organizational knowledge, understanding risk, whatever that might be. So that is certainly the term we know. Now we are seeing a growing convergence of technologies used by, business analysts in that broad term, and also by data scientists. So certainly the emergence of things like artificial intelligence and machine learning are opening up exciting new possibilities, even within audit analytics. Although for some, though, certainly feedback we're getting, there's also creating some confusion or sort of exaggerated expectations about the roles these technologies can play within analytics. So we really want to go through all this, and as I said earlier, define some terms and so give some context to what you're seeing today. So although business intelligence and that category of analytics is certainly there is some real interesting possibilities as you see more of these newer technologies come in place as well. And as we'll see in this diagram as well, robotic process automation is another component and technology that we will sort of briefly define as well as we go forward. Okay, so automation. So this is how we would define that. Automatically controlled operation of an apparatus, a process, or a system by mechanical or electronic devices that take the place of human labor. So this is out of Webster's. Now, allow it to be better used elsewhere. That's something I added on there, just hopefully thought it'd be worth sharing, and Keith and I are going to speak to that a bit more later on. And as well, there's another variation of this technique for making an apparatus or a process, a system operate automatically. So that is, just some of the standard definitions, because it's key to emphasize this now. We're talking about automation of analytics, not just the analytics themselves. And I know I would say, even as far as our experience with the audit community, we would define analytics that are scheduled to run on a repeated basis, and they're purpose built to include of the subject matter expertise of compliance, audit, and fraud detection. Okay, over to you, Keith.
Yeah, and I think it's good that we go over a couple of these definitions, because a lot of times those that are not familiar, we tend to panic a little. It's uncertain. So I always encourage that the technology should support and help you in your work. A lot of times the fear can be, well, if we do this, it's going to replace me. And I think that's a common phrase that those of us in audit have heard often: do more with less. And I don't like that phrase, that connotation, because that means, well, if we start using technology, we can eliminate your job. And that's not the message we want to communicate. I always prefer do more with the same versus do more with less. So I want to give you an example of just what that could look like to help you. In a recent fraud case, we were asked to quantify dollars lost. The challenge we had was the raw data we needed was not part of the application. It wasn't any report you could get to. We had to go through the raw log files. This is over a period of time, so we had about 1,800 files that we needed to obtain. The issue is there's credit card information, there's other sensitive data on there, therefore that data is encrypted. The vendor has a solution, but it requires a manual process. So I'll just play the video. The steps are here, but to give you an idea, we created this bot to help us get that data out. And it's an example that will show opening the vendor application. We have to find the encrypted log file. We then have to click on a button to decrypt it. This is the vendor specific tool. So this is the only way you're going to be able to get this data decrypted. Once it's decrypted, we're going to open Notepad, save this decrypted file. We have to close Notepad. We have to close the existing log file and then move on to the next one in the queue. So this required about, again, 1800 plus daily log files. Who's going to do this work? Is it going to be Keith? Is it going to be our client? Is it going to be the vendor? And of course, with the fraud case, we have to be worried about chain of custody. So is there anybody that has time in their day to sit here and do this over and over and over and over repeatedly? That's not very realistic. We often have emails popping up, people stopping into the cubes, discussions, where did I leave? So this shows how we're able to save that time. I think it was estimated that it would have taken at least 40 hours, and the bot took about 10 to develop, but it gave us that trust around that data. So this is an example I'd like to show you, but when we say bots and how's that going to impact, this is an example of something where I would not want to do that work by hand. So we have a great quote, I think, from the founder of Slack. There's a lot of automation that can happen that isn't a replacement of humans, but of mind-numbing behavior. Excuse me. And for me, that's something I like to call monkey work. You're just it's just something you're tinkering with. It doesn't really get you anywhere. Things like bots can help you eliminate those lower level tasks so that you can focus on higher risk, higher priority items.
Okay, let's get more into some of the terms I mentioned earlier we want to define. Obviously, AI, artificial intelligence, is very much in vogue right now. A lot of talk around this, and it said there's some great applications for this. Certainly how you might define this, how it is defined, the computer simulation of human thought, such as reasoning. So that's the simple definition that we put forward around AI. And as you saw from that diagram, if you recall the diagram, there is under the data science category, there is a whole circle there for AI. Within that, there was machine learning. So this would be considered a subset of artificial intelligence, focused on the scientific study of algorithms and statistical models used to extract complex relationships. And then presumably, obviously, those that a human would not find. So this an iteration, a progression of this. So that's how you would consider and define machine learning, and it's important to sort of understand where that fits in to the overall topic area of not just analytics, particularly around in the AI. And then within machine learning, there's another subset of that, which is certainly a class of machine learning focused on building deep neural networks. And this is we find that certainly here is most commonly used within the area of fraud detection, of analyzing things, transactions, or it's credit card transactions, whatever. But there's just another very interesting topic. And certainly all things AI, these are ones that potentially can be part of an automation or cannot. You can go either way, but they certainly are there. And so something to draw on. We are not going to speak too much today about this. We just wanted to, again, give context to things we're talking about and want to provide. But just so these terms that you are, I'm sure, facing and understanding, good content on that out there. Our focus today is just to give some context to these areas in the overall needs around analytics and automation of analytics. So robotic process automation. So this would be another way people might see automation, and which is very valid. Certainly and this is, as you can see here from this definition, very much an emerging form of technology that's gaining wider acceptance. I've certainly seen even audit departments specifically hire and task people around this very thing, around using robotic process automation. So certainly the intent of creating these robots, as Keith sort of going to give you an example of one just a minute ago, and giving the ability to take away the redundant work, repetitive work, the mind-numbing work, and really allow you, as you might consider the knowledge worker, to use and apply your talents in the right areas. So we thought it'd be worthwhile as well to just sort of show a bit of the technology landscape as we would see it, and obviously even name some of the more common vendors in each of these spaces, sort of, again, to give further clarity as to where these things might all fit in and how they might support automation of analytics. So first category is RPA, and Automation Anywhere, UiPath, Prism are examples of RPA technologies. If you were watching Keith's video closely, you would have seen that he was created that and running that within UiPath. So just an example of great use of that technology to automate a repetitive task. Then you have more general analytic technologies like Alteryx, which certainly is being used in all areas, including certainly gaining use within the audit community. And these are just not just Alteryx, but Alteryx Server. So we're talking to technologies now that really support automation of analytics, not just analytics themselves. And sort of some of the categories that we are a part of is around obviously audit analytics, and we have Arbutus Server and other technologies as well in this category, and then things around exception management and ways of remediating that. So this is also an area we're going to get into today. Certainly more of the common query languages, whether that's SQL or R and so on. And of course, I'm sure any of you have done any sort of investigation around the actual use of AI technology, but certainly there is a growing number of vendors in that space as well. Certainly can be a blending of certain capabilities even among all these ones, but certainly we wanted to sort of show each of these categories and the vendors that sort of have that as their point of emphasis right now. Okay, we're into our next polling question. Any questions as well, Jim?
Launch the next polling question, so please take a moment to answer. We have a couple of questions that came in. The first one, what tool is used to create the bot demonstrated in the short video just shown? I think that's directed to Keith.
Yep, it's UiPath. It's an open source platform.
Okay, and it looks like another question here for Keith. With the expanded capabilities of Excel, where does Excel, Power Pivot, and BI fit into the technology landscape?
Well, I'm not one to speak on Excel because of its limitations, both record types and, file types and record counts. So I think it's what, 65,356. That's the row limit you can have in Excel prior to, I think, version 2007. And then after 2007, I think it's 1.2 million rows. And again, I didn't have much experience with Excel because during the public accounting days, when you're asking data from a client, it doesn't always fit in that little box. So I don't really have that much experience with Excel due to the limitations.
Okay.
I would say as well, if I could just comment on that as well. We're really certainly things like Excel, and I think some of Power BI, and you can think of things like Tableau. Those are excellent analytics technologies, but certainly not directly associated with maybe the automation part of it. So you can certainly use them for that. As Keith mentioned, obviously there's some inherent challenges with Excel, but that aside, it's just really the focus we're trying to highlight here just around automation, ability to support automation, as opposed to just analytics themselves.
Okay, we've got 89% have voted. So again, if you're looking for CPE, you must answer all of the polling questions. So we're going to leave the poll open for about another 10 seconds. So please register your vote. We've got 90% have voted. We will be closing the poll in 10 seconds. Okay, and we are closing the poll now. And
Okay.
sharing the results.
Yeah. Well, this would be what we would expect, mostly through email and spreadsheets. Anything you want to comment on that, Keith?
That's what I expected to see.
Yeah. All right. All right. Thank you, everybody, for your input on that. And hopefully everyone gets some insight from that as well. Okay, let's move on. So, automation of analytics.
Yeah, I'm going to be talking about kind of how we're building this up. So what I've seen from my experiences, again, 4 different hats, if you will. It's I can't emphasize enough, it's really a team effort. Now, my background is computer science. Anything in the IT world I'm very comfortable with. However, when we get to spaces I'm unfamiliar with, like accounting or specific business processes, I'm not a tax expert. So I need to find tax people that can help me. I don't know all the Medicare, Medicaid billing laws and regulations. I need to find those people. So we really need to have that sort of business acumen, because a lot of the times, if we don't have that knowledge, some of our feedback from our auditees will be, well, you don't understand my business, you understand my needs. So I want to make sure we incorporate that, because it's definitely a key skill. As we look at our key steps in terms of how do we get to these automated analytics, plan the work the plan, linking these data analytics to our goals and business objectives is going to be helpful. But again, no matter what process, what technology we're using, it's up to us to know the data. We have to understand when there's issues and they arise, how does that impact our analysis? What prevents us from actually making this complete and accurate? Anything within IT, keep us comfortable with. Anything outside the IT, I need help. So I need to leverage existing insights from my other team members. Again, this is a team sport. We're going to be successful when more than one person participates to make things actionable. For benefits that I've seen, my 2 favorite are really expanding our coverage. So regardless of what your organization is, as we expand with technology, our audit universe is always going to expand. I love using this sort of data and technology because, well, we rolled out a new process and now it's on mobile devices. Well, that doesn't mean we get to hire X number of people. We're about to make an acquisition, and that doesn't necessarily equate to 15 more auditors. So being able to use this technology helps us to broaden that audit universe. And then if there's anybody out there that are ACFE members, the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners, I believe their statement is typically frauds they last for about 18 months. So in my past experiences, I've seen that where most of our frauds were 15 to 18 months. As we started to implement using data, using technology, we became real time. So instead of that fraud going on for that duration, we were able to whittle it down to the very next business day. We're knocking on the door saying, excuse me, we need help understanding these transactions. And that could be a great deterrent in fraud because those fraudsters talk. Oops, sorry, Brad.
Okay, yeah, so we wanted to just talk a bit about some of the building blocks that can be used in support of analytics, and certainly and in greater extension in the automation of those analytics. So certainly there are pre-built apps and scripts out there, and a lot of a lot of technologies certainly provide sort of library, so ready-to-use apps, and these could be very specific audit tests, like segregation of duties, or they could be more like ready-made script in like an R that you can use to provide perform some sort of regression analysis. Now, of course, these can all be automated as is, or they can sort of maybe also enable some work-saving elements for any customization. Now, they can also be used, and certainly you've seen this from our customers, as they can also be used apps that perform some sort of exploratory analysis of your data, to validate or highlight needs for further manipulation of data prior to audit testing. Another building block here are our data connectors. These can be for databases, whether these are on-prem or in the cloud. They can be for specific systems, again, on-prem or cloud. And commonly, these are be financial systems, but they can be even other systems like a Salesforce as a SaaS application. The key point with this, and as it is a building block, is that they can really simplify how you access data as part of an automated analytics process. And then we also have a category here we put in sort of as development helpers. And these are, again, all with the intention of giving you an easier path to the creation and the automation of analytics. Certainly one of the newer areas is certainly in the area of visual scripting. It's a preferred way to develop and maintain analytics. This is by some considered an easier, maybe more iterative way to construct analytics. So it'd be interesting to have a poll question today if anybody sort of had any experience in using these things, but certainly it's just another way of trying to take the automation, the development part, and give it a friendlier, more progressive way of getting that created. For a lot of users as well, they will maybe go through more of an interactive process to get a result. And certainly that technology now can say, okay, you got this result. Now auto-create an app that will generate these results. So essentially create the code that will become an app, and that in itself can be what you might schedule or as a basis for further customizations prior to doing that. But just all with the intention of helping you, assisting you to get to an analytic, get it created so that you can schedule it. And then final point here is always comment on more specialized commands, which can dramatically reduce the amount of work to create apps, and many times almost even improve the quality of the analytics that you're performing. So we thought we'd just sort of give a quick example here of what that could look like. So on the screen here now, I have some address data. These are 4 examples here of addresses. And of course, on the left and on the right, there's different ways these matching addresses are rendered. So this is really not about addresses, but more just about giving an example here of how you can use some of these building blocks to support your moving forward with analytics. So I've put another vendor master file here on the screen and circled an example of what we're talking about here of, okay, I want to automate analytics, but I got all this data, it's not consistent, how do I work with this? So as you see here, I've circled an example of an address, 2 addresses, or one has fully spelled street, one has it in more of an abbreviated form. So this is a typical example of data that's less than ideal. So this next screen here is showing the same data, but you'll notice there's a couple of columns here beside the original raw vendor address data. I've circled one area where those same addresses that were circled on the prior slide, you'll notice now that the street extension is now consistent. It's a both ST. So this is, again, another example of a specialized command where you can quickly normalize data. And the highlighted column here in blue is another example of, we call it a sort normalized command that does some normalization of data, but also takes the data and puts it in descending order. So you'll see here, if you look at that addresses there, they look kind of odd. This is taking it, putting information in a consistent order. So in this case, with addresses, you could have 123 West Main Street. You could have 123 Main Street West. Putting them in consistent order, making that a very easy process with one command. You now have dealt with that issue and now can apply and move forward with other analytics. So this is one example of a building block type of command and functionality that you can use. And just to show you the commands that would be specialized in that area, here's kind of what those commands are taking advantage of. It's going through and doing a match to the value on the left. I've highlighted here so different ways avenue might be spelled or misspelled. And then it will change the value on the right. So this is just an example of specialized commands with a whole list of hundreds of ways that you would want to standardize and clean up a data source prior to doing analytics. So now let's say, okay, well, how do I get there? How do I get to that place of, I want to normalize? How do I know what all these misspellings might be? So another example of a building block, which I had mentioned earlier, were apps that help you explore your data. So here is an example of an app that we give our customers called Word Count Summary. So one of the ways they use that is they can obviously apply it to a particular file. In this case, it'll be that vendor master file I was just showing on the screen. And then we want to run a word count summary on the vendor address. So what it's doing, it's looking at every unique word separated by a space in that address field, and it's going to count them all up and summarize it for us. So in here, it would be the result from that. So as you would expect in any address field, this one obviously is a very North American focused field. Street extensions, properly spelled, would be the most frequently used terms and words in an address field. So this will be a starting point. Okay, so now we have some sense of what's all in here as the starting point for creating that normalization table that I was just showing you. And now you can take that and actually put those in a separate file. So here are all the ways that common terms in my address field or any field might be spelled. So put them in a list. And now the next step would be to use another specialized command called list find and reference that list of terms and words effectively as an index to all the words and terms that are in this file. So I've highlighted here, if you do the list find on all the words. Now, this particular analytic is assuming things are maybe going to start with the same couple of letters, more times than not they would do. And now we've seen here, we've highlighted avenue, of course, because that was on our list, but now you've seen other iterations here of how avenue is maybe misspelled or other iterations. So this is a simple example here of using specialized commands like normalization and list find and using a simple app. You've now maybe had a starting point here of ways that you can normalize and understand your data prior to then applying more of an automated analytics. This can be part of an automated analytics or maybe in preparation for, just giving you an example, these are building blocks that a lot of our user community would take advantage of to support what they're doing. Okay,
so some of the barriers to automated analytics that I've seen the most common that I'll touch on in my mind, the first one is around just the resources themselves. So typically if it's a one-person shop, one-person dedication, that doesn't often lead to success. I've also seen where management doesn't allocate enough time. So, excuse me, you've taken a training, whether it's a 2 or 3 day training, hands-on, you've got some ideas, some experience, but when you get back to your desk, week 1, it's 40 hours of audit. Week 2, 40 hours of audit. Week 3, 40 hours of audit. Well, when do I reassess my hours to figure out when do I have time to start learning the technology? So oftentimes it's back to auditing, and then maybe 6 months later, hey, something came up. You went to that class, see if you can figure it out. And it's almost like we have to relearn everything. With that training, oftentimes a lack of budget gives us that proper training. So we have to either fake it till we make it, kind of look through internet forums and watch a couple of videos to see that. And where I see barriers in that is that that gives me a lack of confidence So as I look at these videos, I can execute it, but when I go to apply it to my real world work, I'm not quite sure I know what I'm doing. And then the looking forward documentation, return on investment, it's got to be a team effort. And the biggest barrier I've seen is that if it's left to a person of one, what happens when that person leaves? There's no real formal career path thought out. So they move on to something else, and then who's left to take over? Additionally, for me, documentation, I can't stress this enough. Documentation inside the application, documentation outside the application, the software that goes along with our work papers. We oftentimes just try to race to finish to get it done in time. And then as we come back to it 3 months, 6 months, we can't remember what we did, not quite sure. Now we're almost reinventing the wheel. So we have to give proper time for documentation so that the person next time can follow what you did. They can track it quite nicely. And so I think we're ready for our next polling question.
I have launched our next polling question. And we have some questions that have come in, Brad and Keith. Let's see. Brad, do you find that internal auditors have more access to business data so that they can utilize data analysis tools than external auditors, basically performing continuous monitoring?
Yeah, certainly external auditing aren't typically involved even in the automation of analytics. They might have some of their own analytics they might run, but typically these are not done. So we would certainly see internal audit as being the domain of them. And as far as access to the business data, yeah, certainly it is. That varies from organization to organization. Am I seeing an improvement in that area? In some ways, yes, for sure. And this is one of the building blocks I had mentioned earlier, is just even if you're able to enable connectors and simplify how you can get access to some of that business data, is certainly, even from an IT perspective, that certainly is addressing that issue, especially when those, again, are read-only technologies. There's no risk of it, that side of it.
Okay, and we have 92% have voted. We've got one more question here that I think that you can answer relatively quickly, Brad. What is Arbutus AM?
Activity manager.
Okay, that's a quick
Was that
answer.
quick enough?
That's quick. It's very quick. Okay, we're going to close the poll in about 10 seconds. So if you haven't voted yet, please vote now. We have 92% have voted. We will close the poll. And we will now share the results. And it looks like 46% said they lack skills, experience with creating or managing repeat analytics.
Okay. Yeah, that is interesting. And yeah, certainly those skills are a challenge. And this is where, again, as a technology provider, we obviously are trying to simplify that process that requires less skills, but nevertheless, skills are needed. And this is where expertise, and I think we'll talk more about this later on, but certainly that's where those resources, whether they're internal resources or external resources, to help organizations and individuals get further along in this area.
Okay, back to you, Brad.
All right. Okay. Hey, Keith.
I'm going to go through a couple examples to show this sort of progression. So the first part we'll cover is just the analytics. There's a lot of things you can do around vendor analysis. we're going to introduce the concept of duplication. So we've got a couple of different options. You may be familiar with same, different tests. So we're taking one or more key fields, and we're looking to find duplicates, things that don't make sense. Now, same, different would give us probably a little bit wider result set than we care to. So how do we focus in on things that are a little bit closer? We like to call this fuzzy logic. So the two terms are going to be similar to Arbutus specific. Other vendors have different names. But essentially for similar, we're looking for textual. So it does a 0 and the letter O. If I'm looking at that kind of data, I would use similar. If I'm looking at numeric data, I would use near. So the fuzzy logic is based off, and I apologize, I'm not quite German, but I'll try. Demir-Levenstein, I think, is the methodology that Arbutus is using for fuzzy logic. And what we're trying to do is figure out, essentially, if I look at two strings and I put them into the formula, how far apart are they? How many characters do I need to change to make them similar? So we had the example of addresses. We could see the two comparisons of addresses. We plug that into the Demir-Levenstein calculation. We get a distance of 4. So anything around street addresses, we might have to do a bit more normalization. That's why we have the examples of the list find and normalize that Brad showed earlier. Whether it's a vendor number, invoice number, the 67, the 66, I only need to make one change for these to be similar. So it's a good technique, but it has some drawbacks, obviously around names. So in HR, my official birth certificate says Robert, but when you email me, please call me Rob. So in HR, I'm Robert, but on my email address, I'm Rob. Well, it's the same person, but the amount of the distance to make these the same is 3. So it's a little bit further. With Gary and Mary, a distance of 1, that's all I need to change. It's very close, but it's 2 different people. So it's just a technique you can use that's not to be, say, exactly, but it gives you an indicator of where you can start. So I would use this in a couple of different options. The first one is that sort normalize that Brad referenced to. I'm going to use that in my vendor name. So we're going to do a vendor name test here. We're going to run through our duplicates. So that name sort, I'm going to use a similar distance of 0. So the recommendation is to start with a smaller net, smaller number, if you will. If you don't get enough results, you increase the number, you'll get more results, expanding your coverage. And here's an example of the result sets that we're going to send to Exception Manager for tracking. So all we've done is taken the vendor name, the vendor file, we've applied sort normalize on that column. We're looking for duplicates, things that are very similar, whether it's a spelling or abbreviation, etc., for further investigation. So now we've got that concluded, we're going to talk about managing our exceptions. For me, I think most of the times this isn't really given a lot of thought on once it's running, how do we manage all these exceptions? So typically what I've seen is, well, maybe we'll send up a daily email notification and we'll include a spreadsheet. And that's how we'll manage the exceptions. So there's a lot of challenges like that when you aren't using sort of an exception management tool. For example, if they're provided in daily spreadsheets, well, are you combining them into a master? There's going to be a lot of manual cut and copy then that can make it harder to identify trends. And then if it's in Excel, how do you count for GDPR when we're talking about a little bit more sensitive information, such as national security IDs, bank account numbers, addresses, etc. Another thing that's not always considered is that once you have success, and whether this is a daily, weekly, monthly process, what you find over time is that you're almost going to treat this like a significant system. You have to start to have change management involved so that when something does happen, you need to know exactly which processes, which data sources, which scripts, which tests you're running that makes that impact. And we often don't think about it until we get to situations where we're running 15 to 20, and all of a sudden there's a problem, we can't track it. Some challenges on the user adoption side for me is with management themselves, not just internal management, but my auditees. I want to make sure that they're part of the process. Full transparency from the planning stage to brainstorming ideas. Hey, as an internal audit group, we've met internally, we've come up with these 7 key risks that we think this process has. Hey, can I reach out to the line of business? Can I make that relationship happen where we can have a discussion and they can give me feedback? Say, well, Keith, you guys are pretty close on these 3, but these 4, that's not really relevant anymore because of X, Y, Z. But have you considered this? So making them part of the process, the full transparency, that also builds confidence that as these results start to come out, they're on board. They trust the process, they trust your approach, and now they can start to work to figure out what are the problems. And of course, a lot of benefits with exception management of a focused product, a sort of centralized location. This is really going to help us identify these trends and patterns. That's where we're trying to drive to. Some skills, we need a variety of skills. Again, this has to be a team effort. So creating that good exception management around, we talked about change management, project management also, making sure that we are creating analytics that are risk focused, that are high risk, that matter to the business, that cause the, okay, now it's actionable, versus the, okay, we ran something, so what? What does it mean? What's the impact? So we need a variety of skill sets because it is a team effort. We need people that understand IT, the databases, where do we find it? How do we talk to it? How do we know this is real? How do we know it's legitimate? How do I get completeness and accuracy that I have 100% of the transactions that we're looking at? So now we're going to move into another example of how we're actually going to manage these exceptions. So we did a test on vendor name. We could also do the same thing again with addresses, phone numbers, bank account numbers. You're going to have multiple tests around these fuzzies. So what we're going to do is within Exception Manager now, this is a very basic example to give you a visual idea of the workflow. I'm going to send these exceptions to the product Exception Manager. The first step is to review the vendor names. I'm going to give the option to either let the user say, okay, I've corrected, it's this duplicate, it's a true duplicate, or no exception, everything's fine. So that's how the workflow is going to be set. And I like to take this approach at first because we don't know, we're not trying to account for every possibility just yet. This is going to be an evolution. So let's start simple and see how it evolves. Within the Exception Manager, so I've sent a test of 1 in the view for them to work. So my example is with Harry Houdini. I put Harry in the risk management department. So I like to design things that are very continuous monitoring focused to help the business become true control owners and be a part of the process. And the reason I chose to add just descriptions is that the Exception Manager is GDPR compliant. So it will be encrypted at rest. I don't like to include Excel files as attachments because then people can save information offline. I want to avoid that. So as Harry Houdini is tasked, he's got some information there. I need to review it. He's going to add to the notes section. He's going to do a little bit of research and figure out, I think this is a duplicate, or I don't think it's a duplicate, and here's why. So he's entering the notes, and then finally, after that's completed, when things are closed, we can see the label that they used first. So the label is which buttons they click. We can add reference numbers. So I've been including vendor numbers in this particular case, and the notes. So this is everything that they created to close the exception. Now, this also takes some training. So I have seen things in the real world of people just writing everything looks okay to me, everything's fine, or I have seen things, something like, I've been here for 15 years, I know what I'm doing, it's okay, kind of a thing. So we have some education that we could maybe, education opportunity for Harry to sort of realize and sort of revise, how do I actually start to clear these exceptions? What's the proper documentation approach that we need to take? But once we have this raw data, okay, so this is the exception management data. So we're looking at this in Arbutus. Now that we have that information, we can be very creative. So I'm going to try to start teaching Harry over time. That's great that you gave me the note. And I don't care if you write 1 sentence or 500 sentences. If you could sort of put into a bucket, what would that be? What would that mean to you? So I've started to create on the back end, Keith, behind the scenes, I'm starting to create what I call reason category. So I've summarized that for you in the screenshot below. You can see in this first pass, this first month of running this test, we've got incomplete procedures, multiple ERPs, training, and user access. So there's a little bit of user information that we're starting to capture. So what I'm going to do is to be a little bit more flexible. The next time I run this, I'm going to change my analytic a little bit. And now in the output, I want to start to capture, well, who's actually doing the transactions? So with that, we'll be ready to sort of move towards root cause analysis.
Yeah, so far, as Keith has covered, we've talked about the use of analytics automation to generate findings. Then as Keith has covered now, we talked about the next progression for audit teams is to have exceptions, of course, generated by these automated analytics and have them be managed within a sort of a structured system and process. This section is certainly about how exception manager, whatever technology that might represent for you, and of course, more precisely, the data repository that's created by an exception management system and how it can be used for root cause analysis. We see this as an important way of getting more value from an exception management system and the overall context of automated analytics. Certainly because it gives you the opportunity to collect and organize, and most importantly, to utilize the data in various ways to support better decisions and adjustments, from a root cause analysis. So for those of you that are not very familiar with that, certainly here is a definition of what root cause analysis is. There's obviously primarily methodology, but there certainly are tools around that methodologies that work in concert with each other to help you identify analysis, underlying causes of an issue, and obviously taking steps to reoccurrence. So very much, again, problem solving methodology. It's certainly used in all industries, and it started, I think, originally in manufacturing many years ago, but it certainly has found a following and use within a lot of areas. And now it's becoming certainly more widely adopted within the audit function. And I see this even as a topic in a number of conferences now, so it's growing in acceptance, and it helps to improve the quality and impact of audits. Okay, our final poll question.
Okay, our final polling question is up there. We do have other questions that have come in. This one is for Brad. What kind of exceptions can be managed by Arbutus AM? If the exception is not IT related, for example, just a compliance with university policy issue, can it be tracked in the Arbutus AM also?
Yeah, so our system and other systems that would be out there are not designed for any particular type of exception. So obviously, lots can be spun out of IT and of course, education. So So I would answer yes, very much. There's nothing unique about that. It's a matter of once you take the step of automating the analytic, obviously that already means it's been elevated to a certain importance, whether it's a higher risk area of urgency, whatever that might be. And of course, because it's elevated already through creating an automated scheduled analytic, it is, I would think, the more common tendency then to then have it be, if possible, fed in to some sort of exception management system, obviously called Activity Manager, whatever name that would be used out there for systems, and have to be tracked. You don't need to do that, but certainly if you are going through the process of systematically and creating a scheduled analytic, that would it would feed nicely into that. And again, it wouldn't relate to any particular type of analytics other than it's important. I don't know, Keith, anything you would add on that?
Yeah, I think you covered the high points. It's really Activity Manager is really meant to be sort of universal, and I like that feature where you can actually come up with your own ways. So once you see it used in the process of tracking exceptions, you'll find that for me, I can sort of think of other different applications, other uses of how to apply and track things that maybe aren't exception related at all. So for example, we've been talking about our vendor master file. We've been looking at duplicates, whether that's by name, address, bank account, etc. Well, I always like to encourage a vendor master file review before you do analysis, because you'll find a lot of interesting data. Everybody's vendor master file can be a little bit ugly, so do a little bit of a proper cleanup, and maybe now we say, okay, we're going to have a new vendor master process. Here's the steps. Well, that's something I can track in the Activity Manager as well, so that we don't have to remember the steps. We can have stages. We can track the progress, see the visual steps each time, and then the workflow that I showed earlier. There's my documentation. It's self-documenting. So there's a lot of creativity you can come up with once you start to go through a couple of exercises.
Okay, very good. I'm going to leave the poll open. We've got 91% have voted. I've got another question here that came in from David. This is for Brad. What courses, trainings do you recommend to learn robotic process automation and analytics, beginner and advanced?
Well, the training we provide obviously is directly related to our technologies, and obviously through the learning our technologies, whether they're more on just the individual and use of analytics, or more the broader use of more scheduled server and centralized analytics. We offer our training in all those elements, and then through that, people learn how to become data analysts. And I know, obviously, it's going to be a good segue for Keith and Verity. They provide even more broader types of training as well, to sort of teach you how to be a data analyst. So I don't know if you wanted to weigh in on that, Keith, as well.
Yeah, our approach has been something where it's a little bit more methodology based versus tool specific, because I found early in my career, if I only know how to do one thing in a specific tool, when I would go to interview for other positions, because I didn't have that sort of approach experience, it was using something different, I was probably already excluded. So over my career, I've tried to take an approach of, let me establish a methodology, whether it's data acquisition, trying to come up with continuous monitoring, continuous auditing, and then the tools that we're using within our organization, I'll just try to fit in that methodology as best I can. But now, Jim, was the question specific to robot process automation?
No, it's both robotic process automation as well as analytics. So it covered both of those.
Okay.
Okay. Very good. All right, let me go ahead. We've got 92% have voted. We've had plenty of time to vote, so I'm going to go ahead and close the poll on root cause analysis and share the results.
Well, it's interesting, a fairly even allocation for all of these areas. So that's interesting. So again, it's happy to see that. Actually, the largest category, barely, is people that are aware of it and are using it personally in their roles. So I'm pleased to see that as well.
Very good. Okay. Back to you.
Okay. Okay, so as you can see here, there are many methodologies, many techniques around root cause analysis. As I said earlier, there's the origins of these are in various industries, like manufacturing. We are seeing that the use of these methodologies certainly are enabling a more structured way for auditors to look deeper and more creatively for answers. And that's really one of the, I think, key takeaways. I think an emphasis of root cause analysis is that. And even within any of these methodologies, there's, I've even seen people incorporate other technologies like mind mapping technology, mind mapping tools to help you understand and make use and go through the processes that these methodologies represent. So we thought would be useful. Obviously, there are various methodologies that do go into far more detail, but even at a high level, we thought it was worth covering some of the key steps that you would see in all of them or most of them that would be common to all of them. Auditors are, of course, trained to ask why and identify fundamental causes to their findings. But when you look at these questions that might be part of a typical root cause analysis, it's just helpful to refresh. And for those of you that is newer, really going through what's the problem, why did it happen, and obviously the details of these and what can be done, why it was effective. So understanding and going through a more structured form of questioning and problem solving, and as proven to many times, create a much better result and corrective action where possible as well around that. So just wanted to cover off some of these areas, and so you get a better sense of what that is and what that would look like. So how do we know we have found a root cause? So one of the, I think, the methodologies that we saw there was called 5 whys. And again, is 5 the magic number for a number of whys to ask? How do we know you've answered the final why? And so as a means of sort of accessing a root cause analysis, we thought it'd be helpful as well to cover some of the questions, confirmation questions that you might ask to confirm that you have identified real root cause. So you ask yourself, is there general agreement that this is it? Are the causes logical and provide insight? Can the cause identified be changed or controlled? That's obviously a key piece. You want to be able to have remedial action on these findings. So is there steps that can be taken? And then finally ask, will this prevent reoccurrence? Now, sometimes you don't know that until you put it in place, but these are kind of the key questions that you can ask and use to validate you have found root cause analysis. So again, bringing this all together, again, why we're covering this off is root cause analysis and exception management. So how are these connected? So as we've already inferred, certainly the use of an exception management system provides a repository, a data repository that can be used for analysis and of course root cause analysis. It gives a view, when you're looking at that, of exceptions over time. So you can now look at a broad view and see what stands out. And Keith's obviously going to walk through more of an example of that in a few minutes here. So give a view of exceptions over time. And then provides a new way and a new place to look for root cause. So whether that is a complete root cause analysis within that data or a partial one, a root cause analysis from that data that in support of other activities in the root cause analysis that you are doing elsewhere. But really, the intent is, and I guess one of the takeaways today is to use this data to provide new audit insight. And as talked earlier, looking deeper, looking more creatively for how you can find root cause analysis. We see this as really one of the lesser identified benefits of again, having automated analytics, having those be fed into a structured exception management system, and then have that repository of exception resolutions over time be used and support root cause analysis, or to highlight areas for that. So that's really one of the areas I think it's really interesting and exciting to sort of look at the possibilities this represents.
And just to reiterate Brad's points on the having this repository, I really have seen even on the consulting side, again, the managing these exceptions, we tend to default to there's going to be an email notification and we're going to include some sort of spreadsheet somewhere, and then they're going to work it. And just by having that in a spreadsheet format, again, the managing that can be challenging. Might lose some data accuracy due to copy pasting. We're human, we all make mistakes. So just by having one repository for these analytics that we can then go through and look at is a step above, way beyond what we're doing. The reason I like this is, again, our exceptions over time. When they're looking at the daily process, these daily exceptions, we get so blindsided. We get so focused on just what happened yesterday, what's the impact. Well, what happens if today it was 2, but tomorrow it's 84, and then the next day it's 112, and the next day it's 55? You know, when these spikes happen as they go up and down, is that a good thing or a bad thing? And by not being able to centralize this and look at it over time, you won't really know if things are truly on fire or if we need to revise our analytics. Is there something that changed in our business process that's impacting our analytics? And again, a new way to look for answers, which is what we're going to kind of dive to in our next example. So the root cause analysis that we're going to try to get to is around, I'm going to use the kind of the 5 whys, but we're just going to get a little bit of indicators based on the data that we're seeing. So now, in the previous example, we had some training issues and we had user access as sort of these categories. So what I've done is that now the next time it runs, I'm going to include a little bit more information because I'm learning a little bit more about my analytics. I'm learning a little bit more about how are they clearing these exceptions, and I'm going to try to draw in more information from other data sources. Now, the first run did not include employee ID. This one will include employee ID. So now I'm tracking not only who's creating or maybe who's making changes as part of the exception management view. How this helps me is that once it's closed over time, now I can pull that data out. So again, Harry, my risk management person doing the continuous monitoring, he's starting to include a little bit more detailed information. And I'm also being able to capture the employee information. So we can see we've got a little bit of duplicate corrected, a couple more duplicates corrected again, some no exceptions, but again, there's a little bit more of a learning category, a learning opportunity. So our first month, we had training, user access is 3. The next month, as we revise this, we're including the employee ID now. So if I can compare what was done in the first month, you can see training 1, user access 3, and now month 2, we're going to include employee ID, but now we got a couple more categories. We included some controls, multiple ERPs, and still training. So now training seems to have really spiked from that prior month. What this allows me to do is I'm on the back end, again, in Arbutus, now I have access to this raw data, whether it's employee information, vendor information. I'm going to add another category. Now I'm going to call this RC trend. So this is not the root cause by default. This is not to say, yep, I found it. The root cause trend allows me to say, well, now that I'm looking at 2 months worth of information, I can see people with AP employee training, because it was specific to AP, and it looks like technology, the Oracle AP profile, looks like user access. These tend to be the highest frequency that I'm seeing as part of a trend. So this does not mean I found root cause. This simply means now the real work begins. I now can focus on employee training in Oracle AP profile. So as I go through that, now maybe the month 3, maybe there's training module, training data I can pull in. So if you have computer-based training that you're required to take annually, I can go to that data source and say, okay, did this employee take that training? Yes or no, kind of a thing. Which trainings have they taken? Under the Oracle AP profile, user access, I can start bringing in, well, what profiles do they have? What do they have access to? So I can start to incorporate this with the exception management piece, so I can start to figure out over time, where is it really going? What's really causing this? But most importantly, how do we prevent it to happen again? Because I don't want these to just keep going up in count. I eventually want them to be reduced in count so that we can find other ways to apply it. Keeping it flexible, now that we've done some training with Harry Houdini, our risk management employee, I'm going to be a little bit flexible now, and I'm going to let Harry start to get a little bit more thinking of that root cause again, start to ask the why. So in the prior example, there were 2 buttons for Harry to close the exception, duplicate corrected or no exception. I'm going to give him a third option, training, so that when he looks at the next view and he's clearing these, he can now say, he can start to think, okay, I remember that training we had, we looked at the modules, we looked at the, did you take it, are you a new employee, etc. And I think it's related to training. So now I can start to get Harry to think about that category that I had talked about previously. If you could sort of put it into a bucket, what would it be? Now I know he's focused on, well, it's not really no exception, it's really just more of a training thing because of XYZ. So now he can incorporate that into his notes. And that can, again, help us get along that path of getting closer to that root cause analysis. So this is an example from, yes, it's been an automated analytics. That's great. We found some duplicates. Let's tie it into more of an exception management, something that's centralizing all this data for us so we can manage it, and then allow us to analyze these results over time to help us find these root cause trends. So now we're able to drive more value with our automated analytics versus just reporting the exceptions. We're really trying to get to that root cause.
Okay. So thanks, Keith. And so as we mentioned at the beginning, and as I mentioned in the agenda overview, certainly there's these 3 components that we covered off today. Automated analytics, creating those, and then managing exceptions that feed into those based analytics, and then of course using the repository of exception data over time for the purpose of root cause analysis. So this is really in seeing these collectively as far as how this can justify and add value to the automation process within the audit groups. Certainly, we think that there's some exciting possibilities. So certainly, we're now ready for questions.
Okay, excellent, Brad. We have a question here. How many people are typically involved in setting up and running automated analytics?
Well, I think one of the slides Keith had up earlier identified all the different skills that certainly would be needed and ideally needed, available to do this. So then, how many of those skills are within one person or multiple people? And of course, then there's issues around redundancy. So, and then it's a matter of, are those resources and those skills available internally, or is there a need to look externally as well, or have a blend of both maybe internal resources and internal? So I would not say an exact number. Certainly, I think this can be performed with one person doing it all. Now, would that be optimal? Probably not. But a lot of skills to think about. Obviously, having a few people in the mix with the right skills. The key thing is having the right skills there so that it's sustainable. Things around like change management, all those things that need to be understood in order to be successful. So certainly, I would say having it all fall to one person, that'd probably be unrealistic. But two or more, and again, if there's external resources that you can draw on, that would be a great way to mitigate the sort of the challenges of maybe a smaller department or less bandwidth to perform these things.
Okay, good. We've got a question that came in from Tony. How would an organization overcome obvious challenges to data analytics, with those being funding to buy the product and then funding to have a trainer instruct the employees on the use of the product?
Yeah, so certainly that is a real common challenge. Certainly, I know a lot of audit groups I work with. Obviously, funding for these things is a challenge, and obviously justifying those funds. It is a matter of what kind of, first of all, priority are these things, and then it's really clear on the value that they represent. And it's, again, as we've highlighted at the beginning, a lot of these technologies are not designed to replace people. They're designed to enhance and free up people for really the knowledge and expertise and training that they have as auditors, as compliance professionals, fraud detection, fraud examiners. So I know that's a very broad answer, but yeah, when it comes to the funding, there are certainly challenges. Certainly, learning from what others have done successfully. A lot of times, management seeing that obviously can really go, oh, seeing real life ways that people are using this and seeing value from that, whether that's learned at conferences or through other means, but certainly that is one of the ways, certainly that's we've found people, the funds become available. And anything you want to add on that, Keith?
From my experience, and I've been in those positions a couple of times, and I know it can be frustrating. And it makes sense, though, right? We're in audit, we're a cost to the organization. We're not there to make money. So my go-to to get around that, I've learned, is from, again, that ACFE, the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners. They put out a report, I believe it's annually now, called ACFE Report to the Nations. And it describes each time they do this survey, they interview organizations around the world. So they don't care if you're a record store, if you're a school district, if you're a hospital, if you're a mining company, they don't care. They send this survey out. And globally, they say about 5% of your revenue is related to fraud. So if you feel you have tighter controls in your organization, maybe that number is smaller. If you're less controls, that number might be a little bit higher. But as you think about that number, go look at your revenue from last year, look at 5% of that number. Ask for 2.5% and hopefully get 1% of that number alone. That gives you the option to say, well, how am I supposed to find these fraud? How am I supposed to grow? How are we supposed to do this? Use that report to the nations. They've got a lot of nice infographics there. They break it down by industry. So use that number, those sort of metrics, to justify both getting the software and proper training. So you want a mix of training, whether that's online, looking at videos, asking forum questions versus in-house, in-person training. You want to have a variety of that training as well, because buying one tool alone is not going to solve your problems. We have too much data coming in from a variety of locations. You're going to need multiple tools. So it's going to be an evolution over time for you to learn that tool, not only the funding, but then we need to reevaluate my hours. We've bought the software, you sent me the training, but I'm back on my audit budget. So how do we integrate that? So you want to combine that with both funding and being able to learn the technology.
Excellent point. Okay, this question is directed to Keith. When doing root cause analysis, sometimes I feel you can always go deeper and ask why. Is there a point where you stop and feel you are satisfied with the cause?
That's a good point. You can go into probably 40 whys if you want to, but we do have a cutoff that we like to get to. So a lot of times if I feel like I'm too stuck in the weeds and I've been immersed in this for too long, I'll just walk over to a coworker and get their opinion. That sort of helps me realign my focus to say, okay, I don't need to go 3 more questions deeper or keep continuing. They feel I've probably answered it maybe 2 steps before. So it's a matter about trying to feel. So getting that benchmark from other people I found is always helpful.
Very good. Okay, this one is directed to Brad from Jesse. What's the best way to manage the scripts? For example, version control. Do you set up an Arbutus project to manage all the scripts?
Yeah, certainly the issue of around centralized analytics, and obviously based on the sort of the scope and volume of your analytics and how many people are involved. Certainly versioning is certainly an area that is growing depending on again, the sophistication of how you are rolling out automated analytics. But having them be in a project, so we support something called an enterprise shared folder. So this and you could have multiple shared folders that depending on the functional area that you're running the scripts from. So there's lots of ways of segmenting and structuring your analytics, and of course giving a dashboard to what's there based on the shared folder or the project that it's in. Is again as at a high level way. And of course there's issues to consider around of managing around, okay, there's who can manage them and put things in and out of these areas, and then there's the people just want to run them, read them and run them, so there's access privileges. So a lot of things to consider as far as best practices around managing and administering a continuous testing and automated analytics regimen. Anything you would have commented on that, Keith?
I think for the specific code management, the most recent client I had was using Microsoft Team Foundation Server. You can use other software versioning control systems out there. What I like about it is that I keep a development library, and when we're ready to make that change, the Team Foundation server was able to keep the history of those changes. But also Arbutus has a nice feature called the protect utility, which I really like. It essentially scrambles that script so that nobody can make changes. So I can say this is ready for production. I will then release it, protect it, and move it to my production folder. Now I can prove to anybody internally or external auditors that, yep, nobody can make changes to this code because it's protected, it's locked in. So I've got my tracking with Team Foundation servers to show any historical changes, and I've got that protect utility that says nobody can modify it once it's in production.
Excellent. Well, we are getting close to the top of the hour, so I want to thank everybody for joining us today and for the excellent questions that you have asked. If we weren't able to get to your questions, we do have all the questions recorded in our attendee report, so those questions will be answered offline. We're glad you could join us, and based on the number of questions, it sounds like this was a very helpful session to all who attended. Thank you, Brad, and Keith, and Arbutus for sharing your knowledge and experience on this topic. The purpose of our training is to provide high-quality training solutions as a benefit to subscribers and site license users, covering timely topics with value-added resources and tools that you can use in your job. We bring the world's best subject matter experts directly to your desktop with timely information. If you're not a current subscriber, please visit AuditNet for information on joining our community. There's information on our audit program templates, recorded training, available webinars, and more that is available to AuditNet users. Just a reminder, if you're viewing the session live, you'll also receive an evaluation form at the conclusion of the webinar. Please take a few moments to complete it when it arrives, as it will help improve our webinars. If you'd like to view our other webinars on demand, we've partnered with C-Risk Academy, where you can view the webinars anytime, any place, and earn CPE. Finally, please know that we're available for additional support after the webinar. The contact information for Brad and Keith is on the last slide there. Feel free to contact us by phone or email if we can be of additional assistance. I want to wish everybody a good day. And do you have any final comments, Brad and Keith?
No, just thank everybody for attending today. And as I said, if we didn't get to your questions today, certainly we're aware of those, and certainly we'll make every effort to provide responses where that may not have been covered in our content. And said welcome. And if people even want to provide their own feedback, again, in my role, in product management role, certainly even people want to have one-on-one conversation with me around what they see, what they would like, and what's important to them. Happy to have you reach out to me and have that conversation as well.
Perfect. Okay. Thank you all, and have a great day, everyone.
Great. Bye, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.